Okay, welcome everyone to this month's breastfeeding webinar series. Happy to have you join us today. This webinar is brought to you by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, MDYs, and the Indiana WIC program. And it is run by the Indiana Perinatal Network and the Indiana Breastfeeding Coalition. Our speaker today is Erin Macy from the Indiana Institute for Working Families, and there is Erin's contact information on this slide as well. Should you need to reach her following this presentation with any questions. And I want to take a brief moment to introduce Erin to our audience. She has her PhD in education policy. She attained that after witnessing disparities in access to educational opportunity firsthand as a middle school teacher. Her experiences in graduate school and as a mother of four led Erin to realize that broad-based cultural and structural changes were needed to ensure that every person has the opportunity to thrive. Her very first research study focused on women's experiences with childbirth education and culminated in a presentation at the 2008 Lamaze International Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, as a policy analyst for the Indiana Institute for Working Families, she fights for supports for low-income families like paid family leave and medical leave, paid sick days, and high-quality, low-cost childcare. I have the pleasure of knowing firsthand that Erin not only brings a wealth of knowledge about these important issues, but has a passion for her work that is very inspiring and exciting to all of us. I'm very happy to have as our speaker today, Erin Macy.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me all right?
Sounds good.
Okay. Excellent. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I know it's the early afternoon, so I've tried to keep things a little spicy here, a little active, keep everybody engaged, but I'm really just so passionate about this topic and about the connection between breastfeeding and work-family policies. So beyond my own professional interest in how the law supports, or in many cases doesn't support, working families, I'm also really personally invested in creating greater access to the opportunity to breastfeed. So as a mom of four, I just saw such tremendous benefits for both myself and my children from our breastfeeding relationship. And I am intimately aware of some of the challenges women face as they try to establish and maintain those relationships, because I went through them myself. Everything from mastitis because I had a terrible place to pump at work, or cramming myself into a seat next to a businessman and trying to nurse on an airplane. So just a variety of challenges that women tend to experience. I know the title of this webinar was around work-family policy. I'm really going to focus heavily on the law, because I think the law is necessary, although not entirely sufficient, to providing equal access to these kinds of opportunities. But before I do, I want to introduce you to the Institute for Working Families, if you're not already familiar. We are a nonprofit focused on research and public policy that helps Hoosier families achieve and maintain economic self-sufficiency. So when we're not chasing your lawmakers around the Indiana State House or sometimes the Capitol, we're working on reports or presenting on the topics we care about to community members like you. And we're housed within the Community Action Association, which is the association for all of the community action programs in the state of Indiana. Community action agencies were founded as part of the War on Poverty, and they provide a federal to local response to issues facing communities. So they may have Head Starts or weatherization programs or family development. And this is a great relationship for us because we can speak to folks who are working in communities across the state and who really are the experts on the policy issues affecting families' lives. This is our small but mighty team. The Institute is a team of 3.5, 3 3/4 maybe. Jessica Frazier, our director, she has expertise across policy areas, but really great with temporary assistance for needy families and supplemental nutrition assistance programs. That's our food stamp program. Andrew Bradley works on higher education access. He just produced a great report on non-academic barriers to higher education, worth checking out after this webinar if you have a little time to do some reading. I'm our kid-focused analyst, so I'm looking at policies like paid family leave, childcare, pre-K, and I also serve on our Assets and Opportunity Networks Policy Committee to think through how families are able to obtain long-term assets like a home or a degree, and what are the barriers to those opportunities. And right now we're collaborating on a project around SNAP, the food stamps program, with Feeding Indiana's Hungry. So we have Amy here part-time, she's fantastic, and they're working really to dispel some of the myths around SNAP. You know, it's an average of $117 a month here in Indiana. So it's not someone sitting back and enjoying lobster for dinner. This is a very vital program that helps people avoid hunger. And so Amy's working to get the message out on that and to make sure that in this new era of program cuts that SNAP is not one of the programs that gets cut. Oops. Oh, go back. So those pictures are all well and good, but we really like to think of ourselves as social justice avengers. We're still sorting out who's who, but I'm sort of leaning toward the Hulk. You know, he's kind of nerdy and quiet, but occasionally unbelievably angry with a desire to smash everything in sight. And that's kind of how I feel about some of the policy work that I do. But we're here today to talk about work-family policy and its relationship to breastfeeding. So I thought I'd set the stage with a short news clip that I think will help to illustrate where we are in the US right now in terms of having these systems of support for families. This is from our friends at the Make It Work campaign.
Breaking news on the epidemic wiping out America's workforce. Babies. Babies demand food, shelter, and binkies. If you see a baby, avoid eye contact, or you will be forced to play a game called peekaboo. We turn now to Chase Leeds, who is reporting on a containment. Chase?
Thank you, Clara. Babies have completely overtaken this Atlanta megastore after employees brought their babies to work when they couldn't take time off or find childcare, but needed to earn wages.
How many women were affected?
Actually, Clara, this whole baby epidemic we once thought only affected women. Apparently, it's affecting men as well. No one is safe.
This just in, the White House is holding an emergency press conference regarding the global scope of the baby epidemic.
Reports from officials confirm that the pandemic has ended in every industrialized country in the world except the United States. Now, all other countries have solved the baby outbreak with something called paid family leave. I will need to confirm that pronunciation. Many others also have affordable child care. I'm sorry, I'm not too great with foreign languages. My apologies. Now, domestically, California, New Jersey, Rhode Island, New York have all begun to initiate their own version of paid family leave, and apparently the situation is beginning to improve in those places. The federal government will continue to monitor the situation.
I'm told we are going back to Chase in Atlanta, who is inside the quarantined area. Chase?
Thank you, Clara. This mom just gave birth 2 weeks ago. Now, ma'am, why don't you just stay home and take some time to recover?
Oh, I could get fired.
What? But you work full-time, right?
Well, the federal government allows for 12 weeks of unpaid leave if you work full-time for over a year for a job that has over 50 employees. I only worked in Megastore for 9 months. I can't afford to.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry about this. I'm going to have to cut you off. That is way too complicated. And not, what's that sound? What's that sound? Oh, ma'am, stay back. That is a baby.
Wait, no!
It's a baby.
Get out of there, my baby. Chase, no, get out of there.
Hi. Oh, I have to admit, Claire, the urge to peekaboo is almost overwhelming.
Get out there. You want to hold him?
Is that allowable?
Yeah.
I'm going to hold the baby.
Chase!
Okay, so clearly a bit of dark humor there, but with a real undertone of reality, because for so many in the U.S., having a baby can feel like it sends you into a crisis, in spite of the fact that this has been happening since the dawn of time. We can't seem to figure it out and develop policy solutions that support families who are starting their family. And there are really serious consequences for this. One of those consequences, obviously, relates to breastfeeding. So, quick quiz. Mothers who return to work before 6 weeks postpartum are more than how many times as likely than other women to stop breastfeeding? You can go ahead and post it in the chat if you know the answer. Answer is 3 times as likely, right? So whether or not you have that time at home following birth clearly matters on a number of outcomes. Research also suggests that 60% of women stop breastfeeding earlier than they would like to. In other words, they are already motivated to breastfeed longer, and we just need the conditions there to support it. And I think this almost goes without saying, but in one of the Listening to Mothers surveys, mothers tell us that their employment plans influence their feeding decisions. So we know that women who have short leaves also tend to have workplaces that are less supportive when they return. And that's a factor too that we'll talk about today. On the flip side, research in the states that have paid family leave or in countries that have expanded their leave show us that family-friendly policies work. So for example, Canada recently found that by increasing maternity leave from 6 months to a year, recognize that we're talking about 6 months here, they increased breastfeeding by 1 month on average among the eligible mothers. And of those who took the longer leave, many more made that 6-month exclusive breastfeeding mark. So, as the video I just showed mentioned, nearly every other country on the planet has figured out how to systematically support new mothers who work. Some with extremely generous amounts of leave. Here you can see the range, with very few offering less than 14 weeks. And there's growing recognition that partners need this leave too. This is important for bonding and for the partner's long-term involvement in caregiving. So research suggests that dads who take leave early on are more involved longer term. And this seems to not just be a correlation where the dads who are more involved are more likely to take leave, but that actually taking leave might shape a new dad's identity and confidence in ways that promote that relationship longer term. In terms of partner leave, we also see that that's important for the health of the mother, which makes sense. If both parents are there in the beginning, they can sleep in shifts, someone can help take care of household needs so that birth mom can rest and recover. I do want to point out that on this slide, this data is from 2014, so there's even been progress since this time. Ireland added paternity leave in 2016. And it was interesting to read the news stories about that, because normally women are trying to figure out how to encourage labor to start, but there were lots of stories coming out at that time because of the start date of the policy where women were trying to delay labor so that their partners would have access to paternity leave. In the US, we have the Family Medical Leave Act. It's about 23 years old, and it covers private sector employers with 50 or more employees within a certain radius, as well as public agencies and public schools. This is an important policy. 1 in 6 workers who are covered under FMLA use it every year. But because of all of those restrictions, it's really only covering about 60% of our workforce and an even smaller proportion of new moms. So I've seen one estimate that suggests that only about 1 in 5 new mothers are covered under FMLA. I feel like it's important to point out that FMLA doesn't just cover that time for bonding, the new parents. In fact, that's only about a quarter of leave taken under FMLA. It also includes time for personal medical needs. So think about, surgery, car accident, cancer treatment, all of those things are folded in there. Also adult caregiving, which is going to grow to be an important issue as workers try to balance work and their caregiving responsibilities to their elders. So unfortunately, FMLA is unpaid leave, and this is really important because it creates huge problems for accessibility. Especially in the wake of the Great Recession, very few people can afford to take extended unpaid leave. Here you're seeing a recent Pew survey showing especially low-income workers finding that they can't take leave when they need it. And here are the reasons why. You can see that one of the biggest reasons is they can't afford to lose the wages or salary. And that's true not even for the folks, in the lower end, but as you see it up into the $75,000 and above range. In a different survey, a number of folks who took FMLA faced financial difficulties. 84% had to cut spending, half had to rely on savings, about a third dipped into savings that was intended for something else, like retirement, and then just under a third had to borrow money or use credit cards. 15% went on public assistance. So I've heard of crowdfunding maternity leaves. It's to the point where people are really having to get creative and struggle in order to take the time that they need. That lack of pay also means that workers are cutting their leaves short. We have potentially 1 in 4 moms going back within 2 weeks of giving birth, and that's really important when we're thinking about breastfeeding. Comparing data over time suggests to us that this unmet need is growing. And I'll just point out in this chart as well, it's noteworthy that folks are also worried about losing their jobs. So there is that definite fear that as you're thinking about work and family policies, taking the leave, even if you're entitled, folks are concerned about how that might affect their job status. Coming back to the money piece of this, though, remember that's the #1 reason folks said that they couldn't take leave. I just want to show you real quickly that our own research definitely supports this as well. We have a tool called the Self-Sufficiency Standard, and it comes up with a basic budget by county, by family type throughout Indiana. And if you'd like to check it out, you can find it at indianaselfsufficiency.org. It uses data that's available, such as housing data drawn from the fair market rents calculated by HUD, child care costs that are taken from Indiana's market rate survey, and it puts it together by county, by family type. So taking this data and applying it to the family types in the census, we can get a sense of how folks in Indiana are doing. And we know that the amount of family needs to get by varies depending on where they live and how big their family lives, how big their family is. But about a third of Hoosiers are struggling just with a basic budget. And beyond that, knowing some of the student loan data figures, some of the retirement savings figures, I know that folks are struggling there as well. But you might be saying, wait, what about employers who are providing paid family leave? Well, let's talk about this. So the reality is that very few employers offer that conditional family leave. So in other words, when you have a baby, you get 6 weeks of maternity leave. Many offer temporary disability insurance, which will cover a birth mother's recovery period with partial wage replacement. And while a majority offer at least some kind of paid leave, like paid sick leave or vacation time, you can save those days, but really they're intended for an entirely different purpose. And as you can see here, there are about a third of Hoosiers who are left out of that entirely, who don't even have access to paid sick time that they could try to bank and use following the birth of a child. So in spite of all those splashy announcements that you may have seen recently, there really hasn't been a dramatic increase in the number of businesses that offer a specific family leave policy. And so it's leaving a lot of folks out in the cold. Now, it's possible that we are reaching a point with boomers retiring and millennials paying much closer attention to benefits and to work-life balance, that we could be leading up to an arms race in terms of paid leave or paid benefits. This is from the Indiana Chamber of Commerce's 2017 survey, and it indicates that employers are struggling to find applicants just in general, and that the applicants they're finding are turning down the pay and benefits compensation that's being offered. But there is a real problem, I lost one, there is a real problem in relying on employers to provide a benefit as significant as paid family leave. For one, a smaller company in particular could face the prospect of having, a small staff of 6 to 12, and then if they're offering a substantial family leave benefit, they could have multiple employees needing it at once, which means they're on the hook for both the salary of their current employee and possibly a temporary worker or replacement worker. So this could also lead to discrimination in hiring. Businesses will look to hire someone they think might be less likely to use a substantial benefit like this. So with changes in the labor force, we have women reaching parity with men, with boomers retiring, with growing need for the two incomes in order to be self-sufficient. We're seeing a lot of pressure on state and federal government to offer paid family leave. And so we've had some states stepping up to the plate. If you know which ones, go ahead and shout them out in the chat box. Let's see which states you think offer paid family leave so far. Here they are. And if your state's not on the list yet, don't despair. Some states have layered family leave onto an existing temporary disability insurance program like California, so they're really comprehensive. They're doing family and medical leave. Other states still have only that temporary disability insurance, but as you recall, that will cover a birth mother at least for the 6 or 8 weeks that she needs to recover. Washington, D.C. was recently one of the first places to build both family and medical leave in tandem. I don't have Washington State on this list. You might have guessed that that was one of them. They did pass a family leave policy, but it was right before the recession and they didn't fund it. However, they do seem to be on track to get something hopefully this year. And as I said, if your state's not here, don't be discouraged. There were more than 60 bills filed in 2017 related to paid family and medical leave. This is a hot topic. And they were in states both red and blue. Some of them were just studies, as they were here in Indiana, but going all the way to a full-blown plan or tax incentive or a savings account, things that were kind of, I would say, in between comprehensive plan. The existing plans kind of look like this. They are an insurance model. So everyone pays a small amount into a pool, say like a 0.3% tax, and then individuals who have a qualifying event can withdraw from the pool. So you have a new baby, you can have your 6 or 8 weeks of paid leave. And there also appears to be a real surge of interest in this topic nationally. So recently, American Enterprise Institute and Brookings convened this panel of economists and policy analysts from all across the political and ideological spectrums. They put out their compromise parental leave bill. It included 8 weeks of leave at 70% wage replacement. It was gender neutral, and it was funded through a mix of payroll tax and then some kind of deductions. They weren't very specific about that. And they'll be working on the medical and caregiver components next. We also had, in the middle of a truly devastating budget that really slashed social programs, there's this nod to parental leave. I'll call it a nod because I don't think it's a very well thought out proposal yet. I suspect if any part of this goes through, it won't look the same as it does right now, but this is still really noteworthy. In an environment where the philosophy seems to be cut programs, cut the size of government, let people fend for themselves as best they're able, there is this acknowledgement that maybe paid parental leave is something that we should be doing. So here we are, for better or worse, we have Ivanka Trump and Marco Rubio hatching family leave plans. Rubio's plan is to incentivize employers with a tax credit, and Ivanka's the unemployment insurance plan. But again, I would just point out the conversation seems to have shifted from do we do this or not to how do we do this? And so we'll see what happens. But whatever happens, I suspect it's not going to be nearly big enough. At the beginning, we might get 6 weeks or 12 weeks, and recalling that we're still falling really short of what other countries offer, women are going to have to go back to work. So there'll need to be attention also to how well women are able to continue their breastfeeding relationship if they so desire when they go back to work. I think perhaps ideally we'd get to a place where women who wanted to would be able to nurse their babies at work on demand. I was able to do that at certain points in my career. It was fantastic. And there was this really nice feature recently on WTIU about a company here in Indiana, which has a Bring Your Baby to Work program. But I suspect that not all workplaces are like this. Some might look a little bit more like this.
Okay, great, nice. Yeah, I think the delivery can go out on that. Oh my God, Brenda, what is that? What is that? Stay away. Stay away, stay away, stay away. It's a baby. You are one too, you know.
Okay, a little ridiculous, but being honest, probably the state of some of our employers right now. And so we need protections for working moms in order to at least be able to pump and store milk so that they continue their breastfeeding relationship. And this is actually a place where Indiana was a little bit ahead of the curve. We passed legislation in 2008 to protect a woman's ability to pump and store milk. The bill was authored by State Senator Vi Simpson, co-signed by Senator Cruz, I believe, and then carried in the House by Peggy Welch. It applies a little bit differently to private employers versus public employees. So I want to talk about that distinction, noting that private employers employ, the vast bulk of folks here in Indiana. And it's interesting to see how this bill changed as it moved through it. Obviously, it started a little bit stronger, and then there were some compromises made along the way. It's not an especially strong law, as you'll see here. It was applied originally to companies with 6 or more employees. That was softened down to 25 or more. It's really just making a statement about providing a space other than a toilet stall where an employee can express milk. And it has to be during time away. Originally, it was going to be paid break time, but now it's just during time away from duties, to the extent reasonably possible. So really softened language there. And providing space for an employee to keep milk, which sounds great, but then we've added in this little caveat of allowing employees to provide their own space. As far as public employees go, it's a little bit stronger there. It must be a private room, so not a toilet stall. And they're offering paid break time so that employees can pump. This did pass 47 to 1 in the Senate and 90 to 3 in the House, so it was fairly well supported. And then in 2010, the Affordable Care Act amended the Fair Labor Standards Act, which applies to non-exempt employees. So in general, your hourly workers at your larger businesses or smaller businesses if it doesn't cause undue hardship. This provided protection for time and space, and it included some language around remedies, such as reinstatement if someone were let go or lost wages. So it actually did have some teeth in the law. So all of these laws we've just talked about, both the state paid leave laws, the nursing mothers' workplace rights, they're really important achievements. They are important statements about the kind of world we want to have, and they open up new opportunities to better balance work and family. And in some cases, they provide recourse for someone who was not supported. But did they magically transform all of our workplaces? I suspect not. For one, even with policy victories, awareness is often a challenge. So Indiana changed its lactation policy in 2008. Federal law changed in 2010. Here we have a 2014 poll indicating that only about a quarter of the public knows that there's this federal law regarding pumping. And we also see complaints to the Department of Labor that include some truly awful situations. Moms walking to the public library bathroom to pump from their workplace. Employers only allowing pumping when things are slow, and in some cases that means you're really still on duty and you have to respond to interruptions. Or employers finding that this is just too much for them to deal with, and so they try to reduce their interaction with the employee as much as possible, cutting their hours and things like that. So we definitely have a ways to go. Similarly, when we have paid leave laws, there are problems related to implementation and access. So first, the good news. Here's a study of New Jersey's paid leave implementation, and we have a mom saying, yes, this was an essential benefit. This really helped, keep our heads above water as we were starting our family. But we also see problems with implementation, the bureaucratic procedure. Folks still struggling financially, in part because of the timing of the check, in part because of the wage replacement levels. And again, that awareness problem. So employers not letting employees know that they have access to this benefit, employees not knowing they have access to the benefit. And again, even with paid leave in some cases, depending on what wage replacement you're getting, folks not taking advantage of it because they just feel like they can't afford to. I'm not saying all of this to depress anyone. I'm just saying to note that the fight continues even in the face of a policy victory. And since I'm a relentless optimist, I like to think of that as job security. We will always have work to do. If you don't laugh, you'll turn into a raging green monster like this guy. But what's the alternative to fighting for good work-family policy? National Partnership offered this possible solution.
This is Lauren. Lauren is a paralegal at a small law firm in Denver. And she is 260 weeks pregnant and 5 days and 9 hours. Not that she's counting. Lauren can't afford to take time off work to have her baby, so she's decided to just stay pregnant. Neither Lauren or her husband have paid family leave. He used up his vacation days caring for his elderly mother, so she's stockpiling her vacation and sick days so she can give birth when her baby is 6 years old.
So cute. Thank you.
They talked about moving to a country that does have paid family leave, which is almost every country except the United States. But Lauren isn't allowed to fly since 2012. Keeping a toddler in your uterus is a challenge, but she tries to think of it as extra bonding time. And since the U.S. is the only developed country that doesn't have paid maternity leave, Lauren just has to keep the kid in. Besides, what's the better option? America having a national paid leave policy? That's crazy.
So I say not only can we change this, but we absolutely must. The situation is really unsustainable. We need to expand options for time at home with a new baby, whether that's expanding FMLA all the way through comprehensive paid family and medical leave. Too far. And we also need to ensure that time at work includes work-family balance. It's great to see individual employers making that commitment, but without state and federal legislation, without teeth in those laws, those at the lower end of the wage scale are going to continue to go without. So without those commitments, I feel like we're really saying that only some people, some babies even, deserve that time. Our social justice Avengers team will be continuing this fight year after year, as long as it takes. And we'd be really glad to have you join us on Facebook, where we post our updates and action alerts on both state and federal legislation. You can also sign up for action alerts on our website. And then just generally, I would encourage you to share your stories. So part of my commitment to being an advocate is about voice, working to be diligent about speaking to those affected by policy or a lack of policy, and when they're not able, bringing their stories to our lawmakers. So I've seen stories really change the way lawmakers think about an issue. So don't second guess the power that you have in that way. And at this point, I want to open it up to questions. I'll do my best to answer. What do you want to know?
All right, Erin. We have a few questions. We have a lot of questions. People love the video. They want to know, can we see the paid leave slide again? I guess you'd have to share your screen again.
Okay. Which paid leave slide?
I don't know. She doesn't specify. The paid leaves. Can we see the paid leave slide again, Jessica? Jessica, if you could type in what it said, that would be helpful. You mentioned that employer-provided leave could be influenced by demographics and that they might be less willing to hire millennials who might need to be, who might be at a higher potential to use paid leave. However, doesn't that at least
I think I lost you.
by the gender rule? Do you have an answer to that, Erin, or do you want me to read it again?
I think I lost you somewhere in the middle. It sounded like...
Okay. It said you mentioned that employee-provided leave could be influenced by demographics and that they might be less willing to hire millennials who might be at higher potential to use the leave. However, doesn't this at least defy the gender rules with the Civil Rights Act?
Sure, if you can demonstrate that you were not hired for that reason, I think that's a really difficult thing, to prove.
Okay, our next question. In situations where hours are cut after a request for accommodation, something, oh, wait a minute here. Accommodation, something coverable under the PDA, since it is discrimination and ability to work. Is there support for paid family? Oh, I don't know. Wait a minute here. So it's saying accommodations. Oh, I'm sorry. That question's confusing to me. I'm going to have to skip it.
I would say, just in general, and I wish I had my husband here. He's a labor and employment attorney who deals with discrimination issues. But I think our laws are somewhat piecemeal in terms of, you know, how you can file for protection or recourse in terms of, like, you know, equal opportunity. And again, one of the real challenges, particularly with failure to hire or something like that, is being able to demonstrate the reason, and that your employer was thinking about, you know, whether or not you would need accommodations or need paid leave.
Okay. We have a request to put your email up again.
Sure.
Or maybe you could just say it.
Yep, it's emacy@incap.org. Get to the end there.
How long from start to finish was the process to get Indiana to adopt the plan in 2008? I actually think that, this is Tina Cardarelli from Indiana Perinatal Network. Indiana Perinatal Network was pretty much the spark for that law. So I was just beginning to work in this state when we were trying to find sponsors for the law and going and giving testimony. And I would say that it was about 2 years start to finish. Videos are super cute. Are employers subject to any ramifications if they don't follow the breastfeeding law in the workplace? We seem to run into this a lot.
You can file a complaint, especially if you're talking about the non-exempt workers, and I think you can get some response there. I don't know if anyone has filed under Indiana law. That's something I would need to find out.
So in terms of hourly wage workers, I'd like to weigh in on that. We saw that in Indiana, people were referencing the state law, which, as you mentioned, doesn't really have any teeth unless you're a government employee. But we did not see a lot of people referencing the federal law, which really makes me think that people that work in the breastfeeding area don't really understand the federal law. So worked really hard to get people to understand it and to understand that it does have teeth and that you actually can call the Federal Department of Labor and file a complaint. In the early years, I was concerned when women called me that they were concerned that their employer would know that they had filed a complaint. But in speaking with the Federal Department of Labor, it's clear that they will come out and do an audit within a certain amount of days. I think it's like 8 to 10 business days. And they do a complete audit. So the company is not aware of why the audit is happening. And during the course of that audit, they will ask if where they accommodate their lactating women. And so then they're told to fix that within a certain period of time. And what we found in Indiana were a lot of women that were being sent to the State Department of Labor, and they were getting a huge runaround. And so we've really been working hard, but Erin, as you can see, and the people on the callers from this question, there's still a lot of work to be done to educate breastfeeding educators and around the law, and to educate our families around what how the law is enforced. And I have found I've called there several times, and I've found them to be really do a good job.
I think that's a great point. If you don't know your rights, it's almost as though you don't have them. So that's raising awareness, and the education is a big part of the challenge, I think.
Are you aware of the I Pumped Here campaign by Moms Rising?
No, tell me about that.
I don't know. It's a question from Bailey. So maybe, Bailey, you could type something into the chat box to everyone and tell us more. But she did give us a www.ipumpedhere.org where we can go check it out for ourselves.
Excellent.
That's a very good resource. Thank you, Bailey. Can we see the paid leave world maps again.
Yep. Yes, and if you like these maps, this website has several others. One of them will show you not just how many weeks are offered, but how much wage replacement is offered. That's another important and interesting factor that varies depending on where you are.
Great information. Here's a very interesting question. Does leave coverage also cover parenting by surrogate, adoptive, foster, grandparent, guardian?
That's a great question, and the answer is it really depends on the policy. So as we're looking at, we put forward our recommendations for paid family leave for Indiana, and we wanted it to be really comprehensive, so adoptive parents have the same amount of leave as, other new parents. That's an important issue.
If we know of a company not following the laws, who do we contact to report it? And I think, Erin, that I talked a little bit about this, but I always say when I'm teaching this, that the most important first question you ask a woman is she paid, hourly paid or salary? Because you can immediately, if she says she's hourly paid, you can immediately go to the federal law, which has teeth and is enforceable through the Department of Labor. Do you have anything else to add to that, Erin?
If not, it would really depend, I think, on what state you're in and what the state law is.
Okay, if someone has had their hours cut because they asked for accommodations for pumping, does that count as discrimination? The person restated their question.
Gotcha. If they had asked for accommodation for pumping and they are an exempt, non-exempt employee, then I think they would have a good complaint for the Department of Labor.
Is particular federal law where people ask like what they could do in real grievous situations where they either lost their job or something like that. And even though laws don't have teeth, when laws are on the books, am I correct, Erin, in that person can bring a private lawsuit?
Yes, I think you're right. And I think then if it's kind of up to the judge to interpret it.
Mm-hmm. How do the laws protect those who do not have legal status? We have a lot of women who are afraid to speak up even when their human rights have been violated in this situation.
That's a good question too. I think, I should point out that for all of these legal questions, it'd be really important to consult, an attorney or an expert in the law. I think under Fair Labor Standards Act, even if you're undocumented, you have protection. So I would check that and make sure, but I think you have protection if you're filing a complaint.
I think you are you hold the record for the most questions ever asked in one of our webinars. So this is a hot topic.
Well, you know what? Next time I'm going to bring Jeff so he can answer all the law questions.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll put you on our 2008 docket for to have you and your husband speak and address these laws. Our caller was able to tell us that you do hashtag I pumped here and you can take a selfie and post them. I think that's so great. I didn't even know about that. That's
fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd like to take one in the State House bathroom, which is where they recommended that I pump when I was.
Yeah. I'm not laughing in a good way.
you know, there's work to be done in all places.
So a little shout out to Moms Rising, who has that campaign, I Pumped Here. So they, you know, obviously are a great advocacy group, and they support all the efforts for paid family leave campaigns for 45 states. People said this was a great presentation, exclamation point, thank you, exclamation point. Would you refer a mom who feels their employee violated their right as a lactating mom to the Federal Labor Department, even if they're in a right to work state?
Sure. Right to work state would just affect your method of joining a union or not. I mean, I guess maybe there's some context there in terms of, you know, how friendly your state is. But yes, I would go to the Department of Labor.
Okay. Oh, wait, we might have another question popping up here. Wow. Wouldn't love another webinar like this. Workplace pumping is very important, so they want to hear more about workplace pumping. Another good group to shout out is A Better Balance. They do a lot with supporting women with Pregnancy Discrimination Act and FLSA violations. So, boy, you people are just a warehouse of great information. Thanks for typing into the chat box.
I second that. On A Better Balance, they were really helpful with us as we were trying to formulate our policy brief on paid family leave.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Erin. I think that this is just a tease to want you to come back and be a speaker for us next year, and maybe bring your husband. And so I'll just throw that out there. It was a great talk today, and we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I love talking about breastfeeding and paid family leave and, you know, nursing mothers' workplace rights. So it's all excellent.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining us today, and please join us next month. The call will be on Tuesday, July 18th, again in this time slot from 1 to 2 p.m. And the topic is one near and dear to my heart, breastfeeding, a pharmacist perspective. We're going to have Amy Linnell, who's a PharmD and also a CLC that's done some great work in Indiana, creating drop-in centers and Walgreens pharmacies where families can go for breastfeeding help. And so she is always a very interesting speaker. And Veronica Vernon, who is one of the first women pharmacists and women-focused pharmacists in the country. They spoke recently at a conference we had in Indiana, and they were very, very well received. So we're excited about next month's call. And I also have some news for you. There should be one more slide. Okay, I also have some news for you. There are changes coming to this webinar. The Indiana Breastfeeding Webinar Series will have a new home as of July. And it is going to have a broader reach, so it's going to be reaching amongst the states in the Great Lakes and Midwestern area, and it's going to be hosted by the Michigan Breastfeeding Network. So we want to thank our new sponsors. This is fabulous. And it will continue to be the third Tuesday of each month from 1 to 2. And you can see their new logo, Great Lakes Networking Breastfeeding Webinar Series. And so we want to thank the new hosts for these webinars. They continue to grow, and we will see you all next month on July 18th at 1 p.m. Bye, everyone.